Welcome to the Soul Seekr Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Kabert, and this year marks the 5th birthday of the Soul Seekr Podcast. I started this pod back in 2019 when I was taking my first steps on the path of remembering. And at the time, the tagline for the show was a journey of self-discovery. A year later, it became a journey of remembering. Yet, what I know now is back then, I was still seeking. And what I've come to know now is that it's the journey of seeking that brings us the silent, slow stillness of acceptance. And therein lies our own innate wisdom. It's my mission now to eradicate the glorification of hustle culture, as it was my drive in entrepreneurship that led to a greater whole, and that's because I was outsourcing my sovereignty rather than looking within. So let this be your invitation to take a deep breath in and remember that at any time we can shift our thoughts and our feelings to create the outer world in which we wish to live. Soul Seekers, it's time to grow. Let's go. Awesome. Here we are for another episode of the Soul Seekr Podcast. We are here with Kevin Crenshaw. I'm stoked to dive into this one. But before we do, just as always, we're going to drop in with just 3 breaths. So whatever you're doing, you can always breathe with us. Maybe you can't close your eyes, but you can always breathe. So Kevin, for yourself, for me, and for any of you listening that might want to close your eyes, I just invite you to start to slow down, whatever you're doing. If you're in the space where you can take a seat, finding that seat, feet on the floor, sitting straight up, and through your nose, inhaling all the way up, sipping in a bit more air at the top, audible exhale, big inhale up, sipping in a bit more air at the top, hold, audible exhale. And the last one, really letting the belly expand as you breathe all the way up and sipping in a bit more air at the top, holding the breath here. And audible sigh, let it go, let it go. And here we are, letting the breath return to its natural state and rhythm. All right, Kevin, welcome to the Soul Seekr Podcast. I'm stoked for you to be here. I've been following your Instagram account, and I love so much that you're putting out there in terms of allowing people in general to feel their feelings. I know your demographic seems to be a little bit more catered towards women, but you're certainly paving a way for a lot of men as well for them to feel your feelings. So with that, welcome to the show.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
So you mentioned before we hit record that you have a big background in personal development, working with Tony Robbins. And I figured we'd start there because I just finished a 2-week NLP master practitioner training, and that's actually what Tony is teaching. So tell us a little bit how you got connected with Tony Robbins, that type of work, what brought you there, and what that experience was like.
Yeah, I got started in network marketing pretty early on, and the company was always pushing personal development in some fashion. And, this was 15-ish years ago. So I was on YouTube and found Tony's talks, and I was just doing that every single day and gotten this role in a kick of Tony, I guess you could say. And then a friend of mine was like, "Oh my God, I'm going to a live event. You should go." And I was like flat broke, but I borrowed money, sold shit to get the ticket, to get the flight. I show up. I didn't even have a place to stay. I didn't have money for food. I was just like, I'm here and I'm going to change my fucking life. And that did change my life in a massive way. Just that energy that I carried into the event. And then, yeah, I plugged in, and I found myself in between a rock and a hard place. A few months later, like my internal life was changed, but external was lagging, as it sometimes does. And I was like, man, I got to get around that energy again. And my friend was like, well, why don't you crew? And I was like, what's that? He's like, you basically work the events for free, but you just had to have attended before. And I was like, fuck yeah, I'm in. and fell in love with the service part of it all and the community with the crew, and really stepped into leadership role there, and followed him around for many years, kind of doing the do with that. And that's kind of how I got on the in, at least.
On the end of what is that?
Tony Robbins facilitating, like helping
Oh,
facilitate it.
oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you're
So,
saying you and Tony are homies or something in
oh,
terms of
not at
on the
all.
end. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just alluding to the question you asked of how did I get started at it, and that's how I got started with it.
No, amazing. And what has changed in your life since finding that? Like, what it looked like before you went to that event, and then when you experienced that, a lot of times people will go to these peak experiences, and then they just kind of hit rock bottom again because they aren't integrating it. So, what did that actually look like for you?
Yeah, I wasn't. I peak experience, and my integration looked like, holy shit, I hate my life. I got to change a lot of shit. So it looked like disrupting my life and my life. I'm moving. I quit jobs. Like it was a lot. And that's why I needed to be around the energy again. But really, the integration I found was the community, and also recognizing that I didn't have to chase peak experiences, which took me near death experience almost 10 years later to recognize that that's not how you change your life all the time. It doesn't have to be this big cathartic thing.
Mm.
So at least that's what I learned.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because a lot of times it can just be those highs and lows because we're not making those changes. But in terms of the near-death experience, before we hit record, you mentioned you had one with plant medicine. Imagine that's what you're alluding to.
Yeah.
Open to sharing that?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, what I'll say is like, be mindful if you are going to do plant medicine of where it's sourced and who you're doing it with. Because I didn't know the dosage, and neither did my facilitator, and they were out of integrity. And so I took enough for like 30 people by accident. And with this specific plant medicine that I did, you can't actually die from it, but we didn't know that it was powdered and it expands when it hits liquid. And so it's expanding in my stomach and rupturing my colon and stomach, and caused a lot of digestive issues. And that was actually what almost killed me. I should have gotten pumped out and I didn't. And there's just a whole slew of things with that. But I had stomach problems for the past 5 years that I've finally gotten over, literally about 6 months ago.
Oh, well, congratulations. That's gotta feel great.
Yeah, yeah, freedom for sure. But it deepened my work, man. I mean, it helped me understand somatics, it helped me understand the nervous system, it helped me understand
Hmm.
human life in a much deeper way. You could say I had my spiritual awakening during that time, whatever, but a different view of the world, especially once you rub up against death, you just see everything different.
100%. And are you open to sharing which medicine that was?
Yeah, Wochuma.
Mhm.
Mhm. San Pedro. So it was again, that was like my seventh sitting. I'd sat many times,
Yeah.
but this one was not cooked by a shaman, and it was powdered instead of like liquid, actually prepared.
Yeah.
And the person serving me had no training in my awareness, and was like, the medicine told me to serve, and so yeah, I stay away from that energy, those energies now.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And for all of you listening, I think that's really an important fact right here because it so much is the wild west of plant and earth medicines right now. And, anyone can just pop up. So use your discernment. If you want to go deeper on that, I wrote a workbook called Psychedelic Compass you can check out. Kevin, so you are the heart guy on Instagram and you talk about feelings, emotions, relationships, trust, all of these things so much. When did that become such a big part of your life?
My whole life, I've always been a big feeler. I was this kid that was drawing when all my friends were, wrestling or playing football. I've always been that. But really, what I do, I think about, oh yeah, it's 10 years ago now. Ex-fiance left me for another man, and then the two relationships after her ended because they also cheated on me, and I was like, what the actual fuck is going on? And
Mhm.
I was like, okay, I'm not going to label all women as cheaters because I know that's not true, but like, why the fuck and then every single one of these women, it was their first time cheating. So I'm like, what is it? What is it about me? What the fuck? And I was like, oh, I'm a people pleaser, Mr. Nice Guy, codependent who doesn't have a backbone. Aha. And I started to like go down that rabbit hole. That's what introduced me to a lot of personal development and things,
Mm,
understanding masculine, feminine energy, relationships, love, emotions. That whole thing was just my own curiosity of like, what the heck is going on? I love love so much. And I think I'm like really showing up, giving my all. And this is what I'm experiencing. Like it didn't add up, you know?
hmm
It was just my curiosity on love and relationship. And then people started coming to me, asking me questions, and the advice I gave them in their words, saved their marriage or changed their life. And I'm like, whoa, shit. And at that time I'm like early 20s. So I'm like, who the fuck am I to be a relationship coach? Um, but it seeded it for me at least. And I just never stopped with my curiosity of human transformation or somatic work and relationships. And I've just found this beautiful bridge of all of it. And I've tried to stop. I tried to do like Turo and start other businesses, and it just keeps finding me. And I'm like, God, all right, must be a calling or some shit because I can't shake it. I don't know if you've had an experience like that where you're like, no matter like, I don't want to do this, but it keeps finding me, and I'm like, fuck, I gotta just surrender to it at some point. That's where I found myself this year.
That's amazing. So, is there anything more there when you say like you don't want to do this? What does that mean if you could unpack that?
Yeah, yeah. I just got sour with the coaching industry. I got
Mm,
sour with the way that I was doing things. I built up to 250,000 a year and had a whole team and all this stuff and live events and all this shit. Was writing a book, doing the thing, and I hated it. And I was like, oh God. And then I had my near-death experience and everything crumbled. And I was like, why the fuck would I try to redo it if I hate it? And I took some space for me to heal me from it. It was thankfully I had some money that I could like live on, so I wasn't working for a season. After being a workaholic for a really long time was very healing. But I was like, oh, it's not the subject. It's just I get to do it different, and so that's what's been at least this process this year for me. It's been doing it different.
that's incredible. Happy for you. And you mentioned that you're a workaholic, and a lot of times with people are so in their masculine, not looking at the gender here, but just the doing as opposed to our natural innate essence of the being. And what have you found helps people most to shift from the doing to being?
Pain. We usually gotta hit a fucking wall and be like, oh, I need to chill. You'll get injured, you'll get adrenal fatigue, you'll get sick. It's the universe's way of being like, dude, chill the fuck out. If you don't go there yourself. But I used to do meditation, I used to do breath work, I used to do a lot of these practices on the daily. I don't anymore. I wake up and go for a walk. I have space with me and God, and I pray, and then I come back and I work. And sometimes I don't. I come back and I call up a friend and I go work out, or I'll do something fun. It's seeing life. It's like, dude, we're at recess. You're not like
Yeah.
you're not taking the classes. Like this recess and it hasn't ended, but like people are living as if you're still in school in a classroom setting. Like, oh, I have to do this. I have to show up on this time at this time and da 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 da. Maybe you have a corporate job, and for a lot of your life, that's actually real. But like, you can still play in those experiences as well. I've been very privileged to not have a corporate job ever, and I think that's a privilege because I have a lot of time freedom. But like, yeah, I can. I've been my own boss this whole way, and it's a double-edged sword for sure because you have to
Mhm.
develop a level of discipline and match that with a level of play and fun, right? And be your own best boss and set your own hours and actually turn off the hours you say you're going to turn off at and not keep working. But I got a lot of validation from work, from being a work.
Yeah.
I got a lot of let's go. Oh, Kev's the shit. Oh, this guy gets shit done. And so of course I doubled down on it because that's what I got attention for. I used to be a group fitness instructor way back in the day. So I also got attention for being hype and high energy. Like
Mm.
I was the biggest hype guy in the fucking gym. And so people knew that, and that's why they would come to my classes. So again, I get rewarded for being high energy. I get rewarded for working hard. So it's no wonder that I developed a crazy caffeine addiction and couldn't chill the fuck out because subconsciously it was like that's where I found my sense of identity.
hmm
And it took me a while to deconstruct that actually. And, after a near death experience of pain, of stop type of thing, and nothing else could have stopped me. Honestly, I was a fucking bullet train.
Right. And it makes sense. It's kind of like the equivalent of that that's going to need to slow you down or someone down in that type of way. Yeah, I relate to a lot of what you're saying. And this has been things that I've been learning about myself over the past few years, external validation, for the different types of work I do, where that root stems from, and just the subconscious programming that I have for myself. Like when I achieve ABC, I will feel XYZ. So anytime I achieve a goal, it's like, okay, no time of rest, got to go on to the next thing.
I've been there. Shit. I mean, did you have anything that slowed you down?
Yeah. So in 2019, I was named to Silicon Valley's 40 under 40 list, and I just built my company up to $1 million company while working less than 4 hours a day and a bunch of other stuff like that. So on the outside, chased and succeeded in all these different areas. Just wrote my first 3 books in a year. Like it was ridiculous. And I was dating a 49ers cheerleader at the time. Not that that matters, but for who I was back then, that was very important. And we were together for about 4 years, and we got in this dance of the first 2 years. Me breaking up with her and then us getting back together. The last 2 years it had flipped, where she was breaking up with me and then we would get back together. And we got to experience that power struggle, and it was so much teaching. So around that time, when I was very much more in my quote unquote bro energy and, just getting into mindfulness, but not spirituality at all, that's when she broke up with me for good at that point. And then the universe was just lining everything up for me. I mean, it started with microdosing the previous year. This guy saying something about ayahuasca. I was like, Iowata. And then it came back into my circle, this whole thing. And I wrote my book, Soul Life Balance, kind of about this. And that's what ended up starting this podcast in 2019, later that year. So that's the high level of what I experienced for sure. But it was depression more than anything.
Yeah. Again, there it is. Pain slows us down.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be it. You can warn somebody, be like, dude, slow down or you're gonna burn out. That didn't do anything for me. I heard that bajillion times, and it
Yeah.
took God punching me in the mouth before I slow down. You know?
Absolutely. And let's talk about relationships, because I just brought that up and you speak about relationships and the different dynamics of relationships and trust. Just give us an overview of what your take on relationships, some of the things you like to teach people, educate on, and we'll see where that takes us.
Yeah, man. I think society. What I like to think about it, society at large, culture at large, is very mistrusting. And when you think about a relationship, what else is it other than you get a teammate? Obviously, there's fun
Hmm.
and other things, but you got a teammate for life. And I think we've lost that. And even when people are committed, maybe on paper or with a ring, they're still 1 foot in, 1 foot out. They still
Yeah.
have their hand on that eject button. And it's like that causes like so many more unnecessary problems than if you just say it's like fully fucking committed. And I can relate to what you shared of like breaking up, getting back together thing. I did that dance that ended when I fully committed.
Hmm.
And I was like, boom, done. This is it. Totally new relationship all of a sudden with the same person. Why? Because I fully committed. I made up my mind. And that a lot of my own fears, doubts, insecurities kind of started to not be held with so much weight. It feels like they would take off and get louder because I was 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and I was so in this limbo land, indecisiveness. And I just think that a lot of people are there. I think a lot of people also don't see relationship as a dojo for spiritual development and a
Mm.
ceremony, if you will. Better than any plant medicine ceremony I've ever done is look at my love life. And even in real time, see what shows up, how I handle it, all the things. Um, and if we can see it as a place to grow and a place where we have a teammate, we view it different and hold it different than versus like, oh, you're supposed to meet my needs, which I think subconsciously a lot of people fall into. Um, and you choose different, when that's there and you see it with that lens. And so I just think that culture at large has a me-centric lens, call it a fear of commitment or whatever, that is blinded a lot of us. And it's causing people to be more avoidant, people to be more clingy, and it's this weird energy that's like a lot of the arguments or the big things, so to speak, let's say, that might be big in your body emotionally, aren't actually that big. But it's big because you haven't dealt with your trauma. It's big because you haven't fully committed, and they might leave you or you might leave them. You know what I mean? And that
Mhm.
dynamic is addictive neurochemically. You're an addict. You're an active addict if your experience in a relationship is tumultuous. And I think if you see it like that, you can then be sober and find inner peace in relationship and true love in relationship and actually shift a lot of these things. So in my work, a lot of times I am approaching it like they're addicts because they are.
True. Yeah. It's a good way to look at it. I love that reframe, because it even for myself, like I would call myself a recovering workaholic, and with respect to like quote unquote true addicts, the truth is we all have our different sorts of addiction, and some of them might be drugs or different things that are going to lead to our demise, our physical health, or even our death, whatever it might be. But there's other things as well, like what we both kind of shared with work or relationships, or not using discernment with plant medicine ceremonies that can lead to these demises. And it's interesting you bring up society is mistrusting. Just last night, I was reading this new book. It came out, I think, 2 years ago. I don't remember the data, but they are basically saying that the generation coming up right now, I forget what they're called, but they are more mistrusting than ever. And they went through the stats over the past like 60 years of how the trust has been declining. And that was really an eye-opening thing for me. And in regard to all of this and thinking about relationships and working together in the spiritual dojo, which I love, when you encounter something, maybe with your partner, with a client, or one of those situations where it brings up some tension or even some trigger points, is a practice of yours to look at it as a mirror and ask yourself, where is that in me?
Not always. I think that can lead
Mhm.
to psychosis, to be honest with you. At
To
least,
psychosis?
yeah, yeah. It's a very egoic way of looking at life. If you think everything's about you and everything trigger is still a way to look internal.
Mhm.
Sometimes, how am I holding it could be a perspective, but what does it say about me? Like if I get triggered from some conversation that happens, yeah, I can be like, okay, what's here for me? Da da da. But I don't need to look at the external situation all the time. What is it about them that then I don't know, man. We play our own games, is what I like to say to
Mhm.
my clients. If you think something's easy, it's going to be easy. If you think it's hard, it's going to be hard. And like if you think the inner work is going to be this puzzle game of like you got to do all these things and it's so confusing and complex, like I don't know. I think there's an easier way, which is like, oh, I just got triggered. Okay, what's the truth here? I'm going to choose from my soul, not my emotions in my body right now.
Mhm.
Period. Like you don't have to go off and create a story and a meaning about it that just keeps you in that fucking energy. At least that's been my experience. I don't know about you. Um,
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing just differently.
okay.
Because from my perspective, a lot of times when I look at my trigger points, the first thing I do now is be like, okay, is this mine?
Oh yeah.
Be like, is this reflecting back to me? And then there's, for me, it doesn't feel so much like an egoic type thing. It feels more like a spiritual thing. Like it's that messenger, it's that vessel, and being like, hey, here's a little warning sign so you don't have to go through those loud screams that we were talking about earlier. So, pr- processing and holding space with whether it be friends, loved ones, or partner. How besides like just breathing through it, because it's easy to say like, oh yeah, just breathe, right? Like how do you actually move through that?
Well, it depends on what the trigger is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Personally, if I need space, I'll ask for it. Hey, I'm really triggered right now. I need some space. And I collect myself, and I'm able to show up clear-minded. Um, yeah, I find myself not as triggered much these days. And I don't, I say that because I've healed a lot of shame, and shame was causing a lot of the stuff. When I freed myself from shame specifically, I stopped getting triggered as much
Mm. How
personally.
did, yeah, yeah. I don't get triggered that much at all anymore, much these days. It's got to be something big. It's kind of more of a subtle thing, which I'm super grateful for that. But shame is definitely an emotion that I've been working on releasing for quite some time. And I know there's people listening feeling the same, and they might not even know it. So how did that process look like for you?
Well, dude, I didn't know it either for the
Right.
longest time. Like I had no idea I was living in shame. And it's kind of like the person who's like, oh yeah, I'm not an angry person. It's probably a sign that you have some repressed anger, right? It's like, oh, I'm not shameful. It's probably a sign you might have some shame because everybody to some degree does. The more that I wake up to this work around shame, the more I realize it's embedded in so much of our culture, even and conditioning. And a lot of stuff comes from shame. Like shame is the seed, uh, is the root of a lot of other things that people do work, quote unquote, on. And
Hmm.
shame, for those listening, is like fundamental thing that something is wrong with me. I only learn it from childhood of like, oh, I'm not getting attention right now. So I gotta achieve, I gotta make somebody laugh. If I'm injured, then you pay attention to me. Oh, okay, cool. I'm gonna be more of that. That's the self-abandonment thing that happens. And it happens even with like healing. People are like, oh, I need to be healed. And then I find my partner is what a lot of the conversation I'm in. And I'm like, well, you're still looking at everything as transactional. You're still looking as everything as if you were to be worthy, which is a whole nother conversation. But on the shame bit, at least for me, I didn't recognize that I was in shame for the longest time. I just was experiencing a lot of dense tension, a lot of confusion, a lot of disruption, a lot of chaos in my life. If you look at the fruits of my life, I was not peaceful. And that came from my striving to be somebody else other than who I was.
Mm.
And the universe and God was like, that ain't you. Nope, nope. Shut it down. Shut it down. This isn't going to work out. That thing's not going to work out because guess what? It's not authentically you, even though you feel like it is. I felt like it was, I was being my authentic self, but fundamentally, I really wasn't. I had a lot of shame. I was beating myself up for how relationships ended in the past. I was beating myself up for and making myself wrong for even the women who left and cheated on me. I was like, oh, I didn't show up in a certain way, and so it was my fault. And taking 100% responsibility, right, as we're taught in
And just to pause there, that's a good place to come back the mirror work, right? Because
yeah,
you're bringing up a good point earlier that we can apply right now perfectly. Because just because your partner, if you're listening and you've had someone recently cheat on you, or you've had exes like Kevin, where it was multiple strings of partners in a row cheating on you, that doesn't always mean that there's something that you did to create that situation. But there is some teaching lesson. There always is, because that's where we can get into the opposite side. So that's why I like this dance of soul life balance, thinking like from the grounded, egoic perspective, and then also universe spiritually, like what is this bringing in? But please go on. I just want to add that in.
yeah, that's great. I love that, especially because like seeing the reflection in the mirror of like,
Mhm.
well, that's how I was even able to find out that I was like codependent, people
Mhm.
please, and I had all these tendencies. Was that, So the fact that I even looked at myself uh, was supportive for that. But yeah, I guess with shame, it was like I felt like anything that I did, I was a fuck up, or I was gonna fuck it up, or I had all these lingering fears, and so it tensed me up in my life and my energy. I wasn't making decisions till I was finally like I saw the perspective, and it was literally one day, all the shame just felt like it melted away
Mhm.
because I recognized that even in my fuck ups, it was for the greatest good.
Mhm.
I was supposed to go through those experiences because then it shifted my perspective and woke me up to my work that then aligned me with being the heart guy that aligned me with all the thousands of people I've been able to help and support. right? That like that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for those experiences. Like if I got the things that I've always wanted, or if I never fucked up, I wouldn't have learned the lessons and been molded into the person that I am today. Being homeless in my car, like holding a loaded pistol in my mouth, the near death experience, all the breakups that I've had, all the fuck ups that I've had. If those things didn't happen, I wouldn't have the wisdom that I have today. I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't have helped people in the way that I do. My life would have gone a totally different trajectory. So what if the only way that I would be where I'm at right now today is if all of those things happened? So you're telling me even in my like codependent patterns, it was supposed to happen? Yeah, because that's what I needed to go through to learn. They needed to go through to wake up. Also, like other people that were involved, I would have never met them. I would like there were so many blessings, whether they moved locations and they needed to move and get out of another situation, but I wouldn't have even gotten into that relationship if I wasn't codependent. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, oh my God,
Hmm.
there's so much more to this orchestration and this dance than we could even fucking fathom. And so what if it's all perfect and you can't actually fuck up? And then I was like,
Hmm.
oh my God, I can't fuck up. I've never fucked up. And then it's just like it all, I saw that perspective, everything slid off me and my creativity skyrocketed. I launched like being a DJ and all this other stuff. My business started turning on again. I felt free because I was like, oh, I can't fuck up. If I'm just genuine in my own expression and I'm a good person and I follow myself with integrity in everything that I do, then even my fuck ups are stepping stones to what I'm meant to be and trusting that versus trying to control it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the key really to surrender to it. And I appreciate you sharing that all. And one of the things that's coming up for me is like for you and I, like we can see it, right? And look back at the breadcrumb trail. And when it comes up again, it's like, oh, fuck, I don't really want to do this right now, but I know I got to, right? So I'm going to lean in. And one of the things that I teach my clients and I talk about a lot and apply for myself is get excited because these quote unquote setbacks are really setups. So if we can look at it with enthusiasm, understanding like, hey, if I'm learning about doing the work, then what's the point about just learning about doing the work if I'm not going to actually do the work when it's here, you know? And then there's the other category of people where this is a tough one because there's someone in my life I'm thinking about right now, but they're not necessarily on the same path as like per se you and I are, right? So how do we hold space for someone where we can see that their life they're being called for something, but given the circumstances, it is as extreme as anything we've talked about here before, or anything even more than that, you know?
I'm just putting myself back in my shoes before I could see this perspective,
Hmm.
and kept get something in me kept going. It was like something's coming. I don't know what the fuck it is, but I'm just gonna keep going. I'm just gonna keep living. I'm just gonna keep trying and doing my best. I'm just gonna get up, shake it off, and keep going forward. Like that level of resiliency of I'm not gonna let this keep me down. This isn't the end of the story. I'm not done till I'm dead. That's what I used to say.
Hmm. And then
Yeah,
you're not even done and then either.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But it's like that's what got me to this perspective with shame. So if
Yeah. Yeah.
anybody's really fucking going through it, I feel you. I've been there, and it's not the weight that breaks a man down, it's the way he carries it.
Mm.
So could you move through it with a little bit more levity, joking? Like I was so tense and dense all the time, thinking that I needed to grind my way through it. And now I just see life as a dance. And even when I go through it, it's kind of like, boop, oh, okay, cool, a thing. Like I didn't outsource my sense of self. I didn't outsource my sense of safety to things around me. And it took me being homeless before I like stopped giving a fuck about money in that way.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's important, but like I'm gonna be safe and I'm gonna be fine. Either way, I'm always provided for, like that perspective, for example. So anybody who's made a lot of money and lost it and the shame of that. Anybody who's gotten success and lost it, reached a certain physique and lost it, there was a lot of that for me of like, oh, I got the thing and I lost it. There must be something wrong with me. That was my story. I mean,
Right.
what was yours with shame? I'm curious. If you're,
I blew through all my money and starting over, and now I'm in debt. And I sold my house. Looking back in 2021, it seems more like out of fear. And speaking of I don't know if we talked about it actually, but like subconscious self-sabotage. I
Yeah.
started to connect the dots after that and see all the different kinds of ways that I've self-sabotaged. And I invested so pretty much all the money and lost it in bad investments. And I can see now how I didn't feel worthy of receiving that. And receiving has been a big lesson and theme in my journey, along as with patience. And when that worthiness comes in, for me, the worthiness and shame is so directly correlated and tied
Yes.
together because when I don't feel worthy of it, and then I do the subconscious self sabotage behavior, which led me to go into NLP more for myself than for anyone else, right? To understand my own supercomputer. Then that leads to the shame of how did I put myself in this situation? I shouldn't be here. And that's the resistance part of it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. When you bring that up, I shouldn't be here.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
shame language for those that are listening.
Yep.
The shame speaks in shoulds. That's
It's
kind of
true.
where it's where you know there's going to be shame there. Because then you're not just accepting what is. And yeah, I can relate a lot. Having it, losing it, that should be somewhere different. And the shame worthiness is almost always tied together because it's, again, operating from like this conditional, I need to do something in order to receive. I need to,
Hmm.
or I need to be enough. I need to feel worthy enough to then receive this thing. And it's like you're still operating in a transactional infrastructure in your mind that works in business. That's where we're at as a consciousness at large in society. But when it comes to relationship and more so spirituality, it's been my perspective that there's a whole nother game you can play that
Hmm.
bypasses all of that, which is you could say unconditional love or whatever, but it's you don't need to feel worthy, you just need to feel safe to receive it.
Yeah.
The mind's gonna play a game of like, oh, like what I need to be worthy of it. And worthiness, I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody who has won that game.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
man. I resonate with that. It's the same way that I don't think there's anyone truly enlightened, at least in my definition. And I think a lot of people, limiting beliefs is another one where I've heard multiple times, like, oh, I don't have any limiting beliefs, but you can pick up on their language and be like, okay, I'm not going to tell you do, but I'm kind of seeing through that. And that's something you said earlier when you say, like, oh, I don't have anger. Especially when we actively reject it, where it's not like, oh, yeah, I don't really experience much anger, and that is true for me right now. I don't experience much, but I can certainly still be set off. That's for sure. But I don't get triggered. And a lot of times that comes up with anger. And I have a better understanding of things now as well. So I tend to go straight to there. But I would feel like if someone's like, no, 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 I don't get triggered. I don't feel angered. That's more where it's like, okay, well, that's an interesting reaction, right? That tonality and the body language, and that's the majority of it. Let's get into the Mr. Nice Guy type stuff. So when you started to unpack the shame, was that around the same time you were looking at the nice guy?
No, nice guy came first. Shame didn't come from year till years later.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah, the nice guy thing. I was, the book No More Mr. Nice Guy.
Hmm.
I think it was, being recommended around, and I was like, okay, that feels like that's me. And I was like reading the book. I was like, oh shit, this is me. And then just recognizing all the tendencies in which, now the common language is people pleasing. Before it was codependency, all kind of the same thing, fawning, right, in the nervous system. But like, it's all a response to try to make yourself feel safe. And I think psychologically, we play out scenes from our past at a sake of redemption. So I was being a Mr. Nice Guy because I was trying to be nice and appease my mom as a kid, and I'm then recreating that dynamic in relationship dynamics with women as a younger adult because a subconscious part of me was trying to get redemption. So see, I'm finally going to come in and save the day. I'm finally going to be enough. This happens with women more often where it's, their dad doesn't pay attention to them. They get with men who don't pay attention to them so that then they can finally be enough and have them change, have them shift into what we wanted them to be like growing up. It's so subconscious, it's fucking wild.
Yeah.
In that behavior or in that trigger, it's not you, actually.
Hmm.
You think it's you. It's very compulsive. You almost time jump back to a time with an ex or a time with a parent. You're not interacting with the person as if they're an individual person in a new reality. It's very odd what happens, especially when you start to see this. John Bradshaw wrote a book, Healing the Shame That Binds You, that talks about this. He does a lot with hypnosis and NLP, but he did a whole thing around like what did he call it? Um, it was like you're enchanted. You like become enchanted into a past something that happened, and you're then not arguing, quote unquote, with the person in front of you. All of a sudden, you're arguing with mom, or you're arguing with
Right. Yeah.
ex, and treating the interaction as if it's that,
Hmm.
until there's completion there.
Man, that's such a wild thing. I had a big experience of that in a relationship, a ruptured relationship a year and a half ago, and that one took a long time to. I mean, what am I trying to say here? In the integration and sitting with it and accepting it and things like that, I was getting those lessons as downloads. It was like because it had been planted in my mind, right, but hadn't necessarily landed. So what I say is a download. It's more like if we're processing 2 million bits in any given second, as you know, and we get 126 of those bits, then I was able to process it in real time because, like, oh, I know what this is. It's
Yeah.
all happening through the subconscious. It's wild. It's
Mhm.
exciting too. I mean, I went through a period last year around that time where my life imploded and it felt like one of the most challenging times of my life. And at the same time, like, at that time, it was easier to quote unquote do the work because there was something right in front of me. So I had no choice other than to surrender versus those times where it's like, what is off? Like, there's just something kind of off. I don't know what it is. That can be so much
Yeah.
harder to find the answers there.
Yeah, for sure. Once when you see, it's like you see it in hindsight, and then you see it as it's happening in real time, and then eventually you see it before it's going to happen. You get the impulse,
Yes.
and eventually that just goes away. But I think just persistence and time heals a lot of things. Like actually, like patience with
Yeah.
consciousness. And I think we're such an impatient culture
Oh my God.
that's why we're chasing the extremes.
Yeah, 8 seconds, 8 seconds. Every 8 seconds, something new, right? Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about the nice guy stuff more. Really want to go a little bit deep here. So men's work. It seems to me, and this is just my theory, I always feel like I'm on an island on this, and maybe I'm just not articulating it right. But there's a
Yeah.
lot of noise around men's work that seems to be a little bit more like rite of passage or no more Mr. Nice Guy, superior, the way of the superior man, right? And from my own background and my connection to myself and other guys that I know, what's been most impactful for me has actually been softening. And I think it's the word softening that can be triggering for other men to hear because
So,
I was so abrasive and such an asshole and so much like in toxicity, out of balance, unhealthy, masculine, whatever we want to call it, that I needed to learn to actually be with my emotions and do all of the work that we're talking about here. So what comes up for you when I say all that?
yeah, I hear soften is, and I hear, maybe more feminine, and which might be the judgment people have on it. I'll say that the more I connected with my own inner feminine, or I softened, we could say, the more masculine I became. It was odd, you know? So yeah, I think I'm right there with you, man. Like there is a level of softening that I think men at large need to look at. The That you don't have to be hard all the fucking time.
Mhm.
Like especially that's not what women want. I spend all
I
day
don't
talking.
think so.
You know what
Yeah,
I
you
mean?
would know. Yeah, they're all your
Like
yeah.
they don't want you to be a hard, tough guy. All that they're actually looking to fucking connect. And why the fuck can't I connect with this guy?
There
You
you
know,
go.
that's really what they're wanting. And here's some codes for the guys. They want your presence, which comes through not just your angry presence, but your aliveness. Could it be your sense of tenderness or softness, we could say. They want that connection to that presence that with of you, all of you being present with them. And they want you to be planted. They want commitment. They want uh, that and maybe it's me they're asking of it way too soon, which I see a lot of, but like you need to be a man who can make a commitment. Maybe and for men it takes time, and I'm teaching women that hey, like they don't just jump on you and like, yep, cool, you're the one. Some guys that happens, but for most men it's like they need some time and space to orient, to feel you out, to try you on in their life, and then it's like, yep, cool, they'll know one day they'll wake up just like I did and be like, huh, yep, commitment. That's
Hmm.
how at least it happened for me. It's like the when you know type of thing. It just struck me like lightning. I do this work for a living and I can't understand it. It was just like, yeah, all of a sudden I just couldn't see my life without her.
Hmm.
And so, okay, boom, yep, didn't make sense. I stopped shopping, if you will. I made the decision. And I think that inner beingness, like guys, we just need to be able to get there, whether it's a career path, a woman, your own, like a goals for yourself, can you decide and follow through and commit to something, you know?
And maybe you know more because you're in the relationship space. This isn't like really where I play specifically, but it feels like for men, it's more of like we don't feel safe, in a situation like that. Do you think that's what it is?
Yeah, I think a lot of women are pressuring you to make the decision too soon, quote unquote, for you, and then you don't feel, yeah, or you don't feel safe to open up and be soft yet. And that's a lot of what I'm helping women understand is just like women need time to open up in the bedroom. They don't can't just rush to it. They need foreplay, for the most part. Men are the same way with their emotions.
Mm,
They need
yeah,
time and space to just open up. We're not just gonna open up like you do with your girlfriends. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't happen. Guys
that's a
don't get
good
together.
point.
So tell me about your relationship. It's like what? And so that comes up after a few hours hanging out around a campfire or like hanging out all day with your buddies hunting, whatever, if it even comes up. You know what I mean? Like, so it's just understanding that the differences between men and women and recognizing that, honoring that, then you're able to lose a lot of resentment and lose a lot of confusion and understanding, misinterpretation, miscommunication, which is what creates a lot of divide, I've seen.
Mhm. I'm just thinking out loud here as we're talking, and something that's coming through, and we've touched on it, is like career transitions, and it kind of seems like a wild lateral chunk or a segue here, but the number one theme I see in spiritual awakenings is a career transition, and if not that, it's either and or it's a relationship transition in a way. So, what are the best ways that people can really, and I know you've hit on some of these, but anything that's coming through now, navigate relationship transitions?
Man, integrity, honesty, and a little bit of time. You don't need to be so rash
Mm.
to do something. Maybe like me, it's in my career, my calling. It's not the relationship, but it's how you're doing relationship that needs to change.
How you're doing? Yeah, could you
How
explain
you're
that?
doing the relationship, who you're showing up as in the
Mm.
relationship. So in my podcast, I interview couples who've been together for over a decade and still passionately in love. It's really fun. And one
Yeah.
thing that I found is every single one of them has had some version of we put to death and divorced our old relationship and we started new.
Mm.
Every single one of them. There was like we can't keep going like this. Let's change it up. But they stayed committed to each other. They took sovereignty of I'm going to show up this way, you're going to commit to showing up this way, we're going to do it different. They all hit that breaking point, whether there was cheating, lying, like distance and time, long distance, like so many weird things that I've seen. But that's a commonality, and I think it's an initiation of sorts of a relationship. of cool. I'm going to commit to you as a soul, and as our human selves, we're going to fucking figure this out, which means we both get to show up different. It's not one or the other. Even if it's your stuff and this is my stuff, it's our stuff if we're in a relationship, because that's the teamwork mindset that I'm talking about a lot of times, and I coach people through. But yeah, man, like with relationship transition, I'll just be, sometimes it doesn't look like leaving. It looks like leaving, like partnering.
Right. Transition. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I felt called to like talk about that because so many people hear transition relationships
Good point.
and it's like, not always. Um, I think it's because you have this wake up moment. You go, oh my God, I've been living my life on autopilot. This isn't actually what I want or who I am. And then there's a reorientation to your external reality and the decisions you've made and who you've been, and that gets to change.
So let me ask you a question. You mentioned that you've been in the off and on again relationship, whether it was once or more, or I think it's your current one, you said you fully committed, right? And that's
Yeah.
been the difference. So would you say if someone's in that kind of toxic type of relationship that's on and off again, whatever that looks like for them, that if one person fully commits, that's enough,
No.
right? So she fully committed too.
Yeah.
How can,
She's been fully committed. That's the thing where I was like, God damn, woman. All right. Wow. You know,
right?
she was in it all this whole time.
So going back to the relationships that you're talking about, by the way, I love that you interview couples that have been together at least 10 years or more. That's so important because how often we'd be like, oh, we have the perfect relationship. We've been together 2 years, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you hear that we've been together 2 years at the very end. But anyways, it's true. So for those couples that you've spoken with or just people you've worked with that have like let the old relationship die or whatever label we want to give it and birth anew, how can that play out for someone listening that's in one of those relationships where they're like, I am committed, my partner's committed, but we still come into this thing, we're still experiencing this.
Mhm.
What can they do?
Get support. Hopefully you're getting support. You're not trying to work through it together because it's like you can't see it all while you're so close to it. You know what it took for me to make the shift?
What's that?
Actually end it and go no contact for 5 weeks. And then finally I woke up and was like, oh my God.
Mm.
It took space. But when we were so fucking in it, I couldn't see a way out, which is why I left because I was like, there's no way out of this.
Space is the probably scariest word in a relationship.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. Space is the healthiest thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, true.
I think they need it, and I think a conversation of, hey, let's take this much time. So the way people get it wrong is somebody usually goes, I need some space, off to the races with the other person in their head. They don't know what the fuck that means.
Mhm.
Versus, I need some space to be with myself. That, we'll talk tomorrow, or could I take some space and time and just be with myself for a week? Like I just need to reorient. The more confirmation you give to the other person of like, hey, we're good. I just need some space so that I'm still in this with you. I just think we need to let the dust settle. That'll freak out the other person. Obviously, that's their own stuff, but give it a time is what I'm saying. Like, don't just say I need some space.
Yeah.
Set a time frame to it. It's going to be helpful for the other person, especially if they're more anxious. And then to the anxious person, it's like that to you meant leaving. Somebody left in the past. That to you meant death of something. Like that's not a good thing. Then you're no longer in control. Hello. That's actually the deeper reality of it. So what are you going to do? An opportunity for you to regain your sense of self as well, your
Mhm.
sovereignty, and hello, trust in that process, and that what's for you won't pass you by. And yeah, it's like when we're so in it and triggered, everything speeds up. Your thoughts speed up, the tension speeds up, and it's like you can't solve it from that level of thinking or consciousness.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
You have to let the dust settle. So if you keep trying and it's not working, space, reset, maybe get a third party and come back together, and you can work it out. That's what I do for clients actually. And that and or a radical shift in how you're trying to solve the problem, quote unquote,
Yeah.
which is, see their inner child, give them a fucking hug instead of trying to talk to them about it, like whatever it is.
Oh man, yeah. Speech. There's been plenty of medicine ceremonies where the message that came through by the end was like, "Money's not the root of all evil. If anything was, it would be speech because it makes us so lazy." To your point, just give them a hug versus talk through it. I mean, and that's kind of always the cosmic joke or whatever for me, because being an author and podcaster and speaker, I leverage speech quite a bit. So that's kind of funny,
Yeah.
but I also hold great space. So for anyone that's listening that wants to get in touch with you because they're resonating with what you're saying and they have a relationship kind of similar to what we're talking about, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, man. I'd say the heart guy on Instagram.
All right. Heart
Yeah.
guy on Instagram, the heart guy.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
dot heart dot guy on
And
Instagram.
yeah, and you guys will find that in show notes. So hit up Kevin for sure. Thank you so much for being here. We've covered a lot of ground. Any final thoughts kind of coming up for you?
No, I'll say trust more. Can you trust yourself more? Can you trust others more? If that's one thing that I could share, man, work on that because that's the root of a lot of this stuff.
Mm, I love that. Trust more. Trust yourself. That unconditional love with self-love. Amazing. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time and jump on the Soul Seekr podcast. I appreciate you being here.